Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the next big thing in sports podcast. As always, my name is Matt McCoy, and I will be your host for this episode. But I do have a surprise for you out there. I will be joined by Justin Davis. He is going to join us for the next two podcasts as we dive in to the 2019 NBA Draft. Justin, he helped us out last year for the 2018 draft. We dug into our big boards, did a mock draft last year, and it was one of our first endeavors. So we're going to give it a try this year as well. So I want to welcome Justin back to the podcast. Justin, what's going on?
Not a whole lot, man.
Well, I tell you what, Justin. Like I say, we're thrilled to include some basketball coverage to the podcast for the last few months. We've been diving into your NFL coverage. We do some fantasy football stuff as well. We dive into the draft. There's a lot of draft nicks out there who listen to the podcast, and we dive into the NFL draft pretty thoroughly. But we're breaking down barriers. We're going to extend our portfolio, if you will, and we're going to dive into the NBA draft. So we're going to dive into the big board today. This is going to be our big board episode where we're going to compare our notes. We're going to take turns kind of breaking down our boards, explaining what we think about each prospect, why we value them the way we do, and just kind of compare our notes. Before we dive in, just want to reintroduce the podcast again. We are the Next Big Thing in Sports podcast. You can also find us online at the nextbigthinginsports.com. And as I was saying, you can find any of your draft-related material on that website. If you're also looking for material for your fantasy football league, it's coming up here soon. You want to prepare, you can go to the website for that as well. And again, an NBA draft is just a little bit over 1 week away, and we're excited to bring you some coverage. So where you find us online, you also find us on the podcast platforms out there, and that's typically your Apple iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, Stitcher. And when you find us out there, if you would rate and review the podcast, we appreciate the feedback, and it goes a long way to getting word on the podcast out there to the masses. So we thank you for that. We're going to dive into the 2019 NBA Draft, and the best way I can think to begin this process is we're going to go through our big board. So what we're going to do here, we're going to go five players at a time. I'm going to give the honors to you first. Give us a little bit about your top five, maybe what you like about the players, and we'll kind of go from there. So let's start at the top. Who are your favorite five players in the 2019 NBA Draft?
Well, to start off with a shocker, I'm taking Zion Williamson, of course, the number one overall on every big board that I've seen. And if I saw one that he wasn't, I would question the motives there. The big guy out of Duke, obvious reasons there, just freak athlete, physical specimen, but he has the vision and the passing ability to kind of make him more than just that highlight film guy. And that's what I didn't see prior to this year, but was on display at Duke quite a bit. So he's number one. No shocker there. Number two probably isn't a surprise either. John Morant, Murray State, the point guard there. There's the explosiveness he has on offense. Some things to work on, and we'll probably talk about that. But to carry the load he did there, did it all, create his shots, his vision, hitting people on time, accurate with passes in both hands. He's a definite number two there. And I actually had a little bit more debate on number three than I thought it would coming in. Now, you know me. I was an R.J. Barrett guy this time last year. I had him, I think, as my number one overall, and saw some things at Duke that I guess I wasn't sure I was going to see. So he's third, the wing player at Duke. The scorer showed a little bit more vision than I thought he had, but relied a little bit too much on his left hand in my mind. And why is it when we say somebody's one-hand dominant, it's almost always a lefty? It seems like it's a right-hand. It's bias. You're probably right. But no, he's third, and I was close to putting my number four guy, Darius Garland, the score first point guard out of Vandy. Now, we didn't see much of him because of his knee injury, but wasn't an ACL, meniscus issue there. So he's back from that and will be at full strength. Just the way that he scores, his size, he's not the biggest guy, but in today's NBA with the way they call the freedom of movement fouls and his quickness, I think he's maybe a Dame Lillard or a Kyrie light as far as a score first point guard and what he can do in all facets offensively. And to round out my top five is Jarrett Culver, the wing out of Texas Tech. Came a long way in the past year. Actually shot it from three a little bit worse this year than he did last year, but I think in part that was because he carried a little bit more of the playmaking load after Zaire Smith came out the prior season to the NBA draft. So while he shot a little bit worse, he showed more playmaking chops than I thought he had, even in the motion offense like Chris Beard runs there at Tech. He carried the load, decision making. I think he can grow into a secondary playmaker a little bit at the NBA level. So to round up my top five, it's Williamson, Morant, Barrett, Garland, and Culver.
That's a good list, Dizzle. I mean, it's not as good as my list, but it's a good first attempt. I tell you, my top five here, we're pretty similar on some fronts here. So my number one guy, again, Zion Williamson. Basically, you hit all the information on him. I think he's universally the number one across the board in the scouting community. This is where we kind of diverge a little bit. My number two is Jarrett Culver. You have number five. I just like his ability to be a player who could potentially affect the game as a two-way wing. I think he really shines on the defensive end right now. I like the way his offensive game is coming around. I think the potential is for him to develop more offensively at the NBA level. So I like him a lot. R.J. Barrett, again, this is your guy, and I purposefully did not bring up our rankings as we led into last year's class. I had Zion Williamson, I believe, number 6 on my incoming freshman list. So I digress. I was wrong about Zion. I believe I had Nasir Little number 1 on my list, which again, we'll get into him in a little while. But so R.J. Barrett, smooth scorer out of Duke. Again, I don't think there's any way he shouldn't be in your top 5, and most likely universally 3 to 5 in some range. I do have Ja Morant, number 4 on my list. Again, explosive. It comes off on tape what he can do in the offensive end. And I think his passing ability is actually a little bit underplayed. I believe I read correctly, his per 36, he averages 10 assists. And that's something that doesn't get talked about very much, given that he's such an explosive athlete. That tends to take the headlines. And number 5 on my list is DeAndre Hunter. You know me, I'm a sucker for these kind of players. You know, to me, he's the kind of guy who's going to be a plus defender, even if the offense isn't there, and he never really develops on the offensive end. You know what you're getting, a guy who can switch on defense, can guard multiple positions. To me, he is this year's Mikal Bridges. This is the kind of guy I look for, that I know what I'm getting on defense. If I can work on him and develop him on the offensive end, then again, I have a guy who can affect the game in a positive way, be a plus player on both ends of the court. That's what I look for. So our lists are kind of similar, but let's dive down a little bit into these 5 here. So for me, I try to place these guys into what I consider to be tiers in their evaluation. And for me, Zion represents his own tier. I think he is the player. We look back in this draft and say he's the future multiple-time All-Star, franchise cornerstone type of player. Do you evaluate Zion on his own tier, or is he mixed in some of you guys in the top 5?
No, much like you, Matt, he's on his own level as far as my rankings are concerned. I've heard analysts, some places say that it's maybe the top 4 separated into 2 tiers, Williamson by himself at 1, then the next 3. To me, it's he alone at number 1 and in his own tier. And I have 3 guys after him in a second tier, and that's Morant, Barrett, and Garland. Now, Culver isn't far from being at that level, but I think there's him at 1, the next group of 3, and then there's the tiers that flush out after that. And we'll get into that further as we go through 6 through 10 and beyond. But I think he's by himself, and then there's a group of 3 or 4, depending on how you see it after him.
That's a good point. And like I say, Zion is just an absolute super freak of a prospect. We tend to be on the same page here. He has his own tier. I do want to ask you, so I have Culver in my next tier. I have Culver 2, Barrett 3, and Morant 4. That is the next 3 players to me that represent my tier 2. Now, you have Garland 4. I have a little bit farther down my list, which again, we'll get into here shortly. I guess my question to you would be, if I told you, say, 3 to 5 years from now, we look back and we say, one of these guys will be a bust. Jarrett Culver R.J. Barrett, or Ja Morant. One of those three is going to actually be an outright bust. Who would you say it is and why?
If I had to choose one, I guess I would have to take Culver. Now, I do think and you like cited Hunter in this way as well. You kind of know what you're getting. A low floor, no, sorry, a high floor, maybe a low ceiling kind of prospect as far as you know day one what they're going to be, and the other things may be tougher to develop than others. I'd be tempted, and this is blasphemy, I understand, but Barrett has some work to do, especially if he goes to the situation that we think he's going to go to in the Knicks at 3. I don't know if he'll be asked to carry too heavy of a load for what his skill set allows and is prepared for, and we know the lack of patience that's seen there, the New York Knicks fans. So I think he would be second on that list. If I had to choose one, it's Culver, but again, it's where he's located, even though he's in, I guess, the top of my third tier, I still think he's going to be a heck of a player.
That's interesting to me because to me, if I had to pick one of them to be a bust, it actually would be Morant. Now, again, like you, I originally had him number 2 on my board. I think the reason why I slid him down to 4 is just I prioritize wing players. I prioritize guys. I think that, to me, the best players in the NBA are those upper echelon wing players. I think those guys affect the game more on both ends of the court. Your Kevin Durant, your LeBron James, those type of players. Now, there's nobody in this draft I would compare to a KD or LeBron. I'm not going there. Just saying, to me, I find it hard to believe that Culver or Barrett will outright bust because I think their skills and their traits will translate so well to the NBA. And don't get me wrong, I really like Morant. But we've seen explosive playmakers at the point guard position fail before. We've seen wings fail before. But to me, if Morant's otherworldly explosiveness, if it does not translate, if he can't blow by the opposition and get to the rim, on defense, I think he's going to be limited. I don't know about if he can hold up to the NBA physicality currently. I have him at 6'3", 170. He's got a little bulking up to do. But I've heard the Russell Westbrook comparisons, and that's what you get anytime somebody is an explosive athlete and they're jumping out of the gym. You hear the Westbrook comparisons. I see a little bit more DSJ in this game, personally. I don't think he's it's hard for me to tell anybody they're going to be the next Russell Westbrook. That's one of a kind athlete. But if Morant's athleticism doesn't translate at such a high level as it did in college, that's my only concern for him as a potential bust.
Sure, that's understandable. And to be honest with you, prior to this past NBA season, and not that Trae Young is infallible, but I was concerned last year, and I think noted on this podcast that concern was about his size. And I think Morant's a better athlete than him, but only a marginally better defender at this point. The question I have with that, and this only comes into play really when you have a prospect like him that plays at a program like Murray State. He had to carry the entire load offensively. So on the defensive end was his lack of playing solid defense and keeping the ball out of the paint. Was that due to fatigue? Was that due to disinterest? And I guess we'll find out soon enough with that. And the more I played him, and the showing he had in the tournament helped him in my regard that way because he made some very good high-level programs and players opposite him look bad. But at the defensive end, he also gave some back. So I'm with you there. And I don't think he's, and as you said, I'm agreeing with you there also. I don't think he's Westbrook, but I don't know that there is or will be another one with that type of athleticism. I think Morant is a little bit more of a below-the-rim player. He can still make plays, and we've seen him done a couple times on folks, but I don't know that he's that kind of angry penetrator and finisher that Westbrook is. His athleticism is there. I think his fallback, even if none of that translates, the way he sees the floor and passes and creates, I think that's his floor. So even if he isn't a star, I don't know that he kind of washes out in that way. But again, I think we're putting heads with the top 4 or 5 people. And while it might not be more than one person on that top tier, I think we have a few after him that are going to be great pros.
You make a lot of good points there, Justin. And, I think we can talk about these top 5 all day, but we got a long podcast to do here. So I want to dive in again to big board number 6 to 10. And again, just for our audience out there, Justin and I did not review our big board. We did not discuss these guys prior to. We want to have an impromptu conversation with these guys. So I am, sitting here in anticipation of your list as much as anybody in the audience here. So, without further ado, who are your number 6 through 10 players on your list?
Number 6 through 10 was a guy you had a little higher than I did, DeAndre Hunter out of Virginia. I think he is ready-made 3-and-D wing in the NBA today. I think you drop him in there, and he can help he's probably not going to go to a contender, but he can help somebody from day one. 44% from three this year is outstanding. And I think that's what he's going to be asked to do at the NBA level, which on one hand is good because he's already showed he excels at that. But on the other hand, I don't think that he tops out as much more than that. The lack of explosion. Now his build, if you built a player on PS4 to look like a wing player, it'd be him. But I don't think he's as explosive or has as good a handle that will allow him to be much more than a catch and shoot guy, which we've already stated the way the game is played today and the defensive flexibility. Even if that is his ceiling, he's still going to be a long-time pro. Number 7 was your boy from last year, Sekou Doumbouya. The young man out of France, I believe. He's athletic. If you see any clips of him, he looks the part for today's NBA. He shoots a little bit better than the reputation that I saw originally had him as. Needs to improve his handle vision. There's a little bit similarities there with Hunter as far as what the lack of vision, lack of handle limits his offensive potential to be. But one thing I think might appeal to him going to some teams in the lottery that may have a longer timetable on a rebuild is that he's going to take some time to bloom into what he is. Now, in that aspect, he's the opposite of Hunter. Hunter you can put in there today and he won't hurt you. Doumbouya, I think, has some time to go before he gets there. But if he goes to a team in this range, I think they'll be fine with that. Number 8, I kind of surprised myself with as I was making this list, and that's Coby White, point guard out of UNC. Really good size for a point guard at 6'5", is electric scorer. Now, he ran that up-tempo stuff for Roy Williams, a secondary break that he always likes to run, so he had every opportunity to get loose and have some explosive games, but shot it really well from three on a lot of attempts, 35% on 7 attempts per game, 80% from the line. What he doesn't do as well as some of the other point guards in this draft is distribute and look to set people up. Now, where does that cap his potential? I think he's going to be more than a guy off the bench, a second unit scorer, or I wouldn't have him 8th overall. I think his defensive potential projects better than both Garland and Morant that I have rated higher. That's mostly because of his size, but also because of the attitude that he defends with. But I think I had him in my first list of big board in the teens. The more I looked at him, the more I referenced the other guys in the draft. I had to put him in my top 10 at 8. After him, I think this might be a guy that we both like. That's Brandon Clark from Gonzaga, another high riser late in the prospect. He had 1 year at Gonzaga, which was at San Jose State prior to that, which really means 1 year on the radar of 95% of college basketball fans in the country. But right away, he impressed. He had shot 71% from the floor, really good rebounder and shot blocker. Kind of at first, the first time I got to look at them, I thought he might overlap quite a bit with a guy we'll mention later in Hachimura. But it's, even though they're similar builds and what you might classify as the same positions they'll play, they're quite different players. He actually had more blocks than missed shots in the regular season this year, which I've never heard of before. Now, he's not the physical specimen. He's, I guess, the same height as Wingspan, which to get in a top 10 of today's NBA draft might be difficult, but I just think he has the appeal that's there. Really good at everything offensively, moves the ball well, good passer, just flows into offense, can fit there, rebounds and defends well, so he's number 9 for me. And number 10, a guy I kind of struggled with at Cam Reddish from Duke, the wing player. There's a couple of these in this year's draft, highly touted last year coming out of high school. Now, was his lack of production due to being the third option most games on the Duke team until Williamson went out? Was it just lack of aggression on the offensive end, not knowing where to fit? He settles for jumpers a little bit more than I think he should, but he gets away with it because shoots pretty well. I think he's more style than substance so far, and for a guy that looks like that and is built like that and as athletic as he is, I don't think he uses that size and athleticism as much as he should. So that's why he falls to 10, and he's a little bit lower than I anticipated putting him, while White and Clark ended up climbing a little bit higher than I thought.
We got some things to talk about now, because now our lists are starting to diverge even a little bit more. So you got some interesting guys there. So just to recap, you have Hunter at 6, Doumbouya at 7, Coby White at 8, Brandon Clark at 9, and Cam Reddish at 10. So my 6 here, I have Darius Garland at number 6. And again, he was number 4 on your big board, I believe. I have Brandon Clark coming here, number 7, followed by Cam Reddish, Dumboya, and number 10, I guess you can consider my guy, Nasir Little. So a little bit why I rank these guys the way I do. Originally, I was a little lower on Garland, but I dug into him a little bit more. Just a high level scorer at the point guard position. And these are the kind of guys I tend to be a little more concerned with because will that ability to score at the college level on that type of volume shooter like he was, will that translate to the NBA game? I think in Edwards' case it will. Again, I think the worst case scenario for a player like Carson Edwards is he plays off ball to a player, like a wing player who has the ball in his hands, and he can affect the game as somebody who can space the floor, or he comes off the bench as one of your 6 men and immediately becomes that type of microwave scorer after bench and kind of kicks your offense into gear. So, again, I think we kind of both hit on the point that some of these guys, when we're talking already on our big board, 6 to 10, we're talking about guys who potentially could come off your bench, and I don't think that's by accident. I think that really goes to how we evaluate this draft class as a whole. Myself, again, some people say it's a one-man draft or a four-man draft. You've heard it described as. Again, I see it a little bit differently. I get their point. I do think it is Zion and everybody else. My second tier from Culver, Barrett, Morant. But then after that, my tier 3 of players, I had a hard time going from, I believe, 25 to almost 30. Those players, I feel are very interchangeable as far as their value is concerned. So there are a lot of players who could potentially sneak into the lottery that wouldn't stun me. I just think these players are so similarly valued that, if you draft somebody in 25 and they were a bench player, nobody would blink an eye. But if you draft somebody at 7 or 8 and they're a bench guy, then wait a minute, that was a waste of a lottery pick. I just think it goes to show you how far the tiers drop in talent in this particular draft. It's just my take on that. But back to my big board. Brandon Clark, just such a unique prospect. I believe I heard an analyst speak about him the other day, and he was trying to find a pro comp for him, and he couldn't. He couldn't find somebody so similar in stature and ability to Clark, and he described him as the second best player in college basketball this past year. He said he affected the game in so many different ways on the defensive end. He's an analytics personnel's dream. People love Brandon Clark. I think with him, it's going to be all about the fit at the NBA level. He really needs to play opposite a big man who can really stretch the floor because that's not Brandon Clark's forte. And if you're going to play him at the 4 spot, you really need somebody at the 5 who can stretch the floor and shoot it, like a Joel Embiid or Karl Anthony Towns, somebody of that nature. Cam Reddish, speaking about him briefly, again, he was the third of the trio of highly touted prospects that went to Duke. And for me, Cam clearly is talented, but I think you mentioned he really took a back seat to Zion and R.J. Barrett. And towards the end of the season, it was really hard to watch his game. It really was struggling. And I just wonder how much of that was him trying to fit in as the third wheel instead of being more of an alpha contributor. So I still like R.J. Barrett. Obviously, I have him third on my big board, but I also still like his teammate Cam Reddish. I have him number 8 on mine. You mentioned Dumboya, again, a guy I really liked a year ago. Just again, you have to understand what you're looking at. He's a bit raw prospect. I think his game will translate to the NBA level. 6'9", 210, 6'11" wingspan. Again, one of the youngest players in the draft, just 18 years of age. I think his game and where the NBA is going, I think he translates to that kind of level. And Nasir Little, again, a guy that it really is it's a projection for me. He didn't deliver much during his freshman year at UNC, but just a talented guy. You look at they use the term toolsy. He's got all the tools you're looking for. 6'6", around 210, 215, a 7'1" wingspan. Again, just 18 years of age. I think he's just scratching the surface. And what we saw at the high school level in the prep ranks coming in to UNC was a guy that projected to be a potential shooter. Now, we didn't see it as much at UNC, but again, he didn't get as much playing time at UNC versus Seattle either. So I still like Nasir Little most than most people out there. I think he does, again, project to the NBA level. But I have, while I'm on Little, I want to make a point, something I've been thinking about, and I want to see if you'll allow me the time. So I want to make a cross NBA draft, NFL draft comparison. Will you allow me to make that point, Dizzle?
Preach. Go with it.
All right. So we're also big NFL draft fans. So I'm going to make an example that I really feel Nasir Little kind of falls into the category. Do you remember a prospect drafted in round 1 by the Green Bay Packers, Rashawn Gary, defensive end out of Michigan?
Yes, yeah, 5-star guy coming out of high school, if I recall. Might have been the number 1 recruit in the country and went first round to the Packers.
So I see a lot of similarities, and crossing over sports can be clumsy. But the reason why I made this comparison is because leading up to the draft, when I was doing my analysis on Rashawn Gary, my biggest question mark was, well, he has a lack of production. I'm not seeing it on the field in the numbers. I keep hearing this guy is good, but I'm not seeing it actually come up in sacks and tackles. And through the analysis, I was hearing people say to me, well, he wasn't used properly at Michigan. And originally I took that as the gospel. I said, okay, maybe he was played out of position. Maybe he was played as a 3-4 defensive end as opposed to a 4-3 D end or potentially 4-3 defensive tackle, depending upon how you evaluate Gary's game. But the more I thought about it was, wait a minute, he goes to Michigan. He plays for Jim Harbaugh and Don Brown. And you mean to tell me that they are looking at this 5-star recruit, this upper level athlete, and they can't figure out what to do with this guy?
No, that's a great point. And watching that, I mean, Harbaugh is NFL success as a head coach, and Don Brown is revered in college football circles as a defensive coordinator. So if they weren't able to get the best out of him, I have to question why. And if they weren't, they had to know ahead of time how they like to utilize their guys on the defensive front. And if they didn't want to use them in that way, then why go all in on the resources that I'm sure to get him there?
And that's why I really fall on Nasir Little, because you hear similar discussion. Say, well, Roy Williams and the UNC coaching staff didn't use him properly, or they preferred the upperclassmen, so they didn't get him in the game. And I'm thinking here, this is a legendary basketball coach with a resume that you don't question, and you're telling me he doesn't know how to use a talented prospect like Nasir Little. So again, I don't necessarily buy that story that Roy Williams did not know how to use a talent like Nasir Little. I just don't think he ever really found his rhythm. And again, remember, we're talking 1 season. This is a small window we're talking about, and Nasir Little, although he did not perform the way we hoped he would, I still think he's a very talented guy. But I'm going to get off my high horse. Again, we got a lot of guys to get to, so we'll probably speed up a little bit here to give you a little tidbit on these guys. So, Justin, take it from here. Who are your prospects from number 11 through 15?
Number 11 to start out with, just recently learned more about this, my guy Goga Batadze from Georgia, not University of Georgia, but the Republic of Georgia. Monster, big guy, 6'11", 7'2" wingspan. To sum him up quickly, he can roll and pop in the pick and roll game, which is so popular now, and most teams run it in the NBA. He's a perfect fit man offensively for that. A good rim protector, but limited mobility. So you have to be in the correct defensive coverage to be able to keep him on the court against some teams and some styles. If you're running a defensive system that switches 1 through 5, I don't think he's your guy. But as Matt correctly noted a minute ago, even though we're only at number 11 on my big board, we're already picking from guys that have flaws and things in the eye of the beholder, and what you want your team to do and your guy to do will dictate a lot. Now, I read somewhere that picks 4 through 20, there aren't much difference in this year's draft. I may go a little bit further than that, maybe 5 or 6. There's a lot of truth in that, and I think the differences in our big boards are going to show it quickly. So number 11, Goga Batadze, the big guy from Georgia. Number 12, another limited but with potential, a big guy Jackson Hayes out of Texas. Now, Shaka Smart, while not having the results he wants the last few years at Texas, he is getting a little bit of a rep for putting big guys earlier in their college careers into the lottery with Mo Bamba, Jared Allen in the past. This guy, great pick and roll defender, a really good roller finisher on the lob, good shot blocker, might have been the best shot blocker in college basketball this year. Struggled with foul trouble, which is common for a lot of big guys. Did not attempt one 3-point shot. So he either knew his limitations or just didn't want to take them. Now that limits his potential also, but at number 12, I think that's where he fits. Number 13, guy Matt just covered really well, Nasir Little. At this point, a 3-and-D guy without any evidence of the three, 27% from downtown. But again, 18 minutes a game last year at UNC behind two senior big guys. I don't know what role that played in it, but with the pedigree and the reputation he has, even on the merits that he's shown, which are limited, he has to fit there, in my opinion. 13 might actually be a little low, and you might see him a lot higher on most big boards than that. Number 14, another guy, came in, 5-star guy, Romeo Langford, the wing player at Indiana. Now, he came in as a shooter, a renowned shooter in the Indiana area, was a really a big bet for Arch Northern Indiana, the scoring pedigree that he had. Now, he played this past season with ligament damage in his shooting hand. So how much of his numbers can you attribute to that? I think at this point, for a guy that looks the part as a scorer and even a little bit of defensive potential at the wing, if you can get him in the teens at this point, I think you have to look at and really dig deep into his injury and how much it affected him. And to round out my top 15, this might be the one that surprised you the most, but not having seen your big board, I don't know. Tyler Hero, wing player out of Kentucky. I think he's the best shooter, if not the top three in this draft. Knockdown guy. I think he shows potential on the pick and roll down the road. I don't think he's going to be a great defender ever, but I think he'll shoot the ball well enough to keep him in games even when it gets down to defensive matchups on the wing. So that's the recap, 11 through 15 for me. Is Goga Batati at 11, Jackson Hayes from Texas, Nasir Little, UNC, Romeo Langford at 14 out of Indiana, and Tyler Hero, the wing from Kentucky at 15. What's yours look like in that 11 to 15 range, Matt?
Well, I tell you, man, this is pretty fun. I'm enjoying this. I don't know if my audience is enjoying this as much as I am, but I'm really digging this because this is what the conversation's all about, man. I don't know if you noticed, but so far I have not mentioned Coby White, and I'm still not mentioning Coby White because he's not on my top 15, and I'll get into him in a little while on why I'm not as high on White as you are. But my 11 to 15 could not look more different than yours. So, and to be frank, my guys in this list are, I guess you could call them my guys because they're not as high on a lot of people's lists. Number 11 for me is Matisse Thybulle, a swing player from the Washington Huskies, really renowned for his defense, had off the chart defensive metrics. Some may attribute that to the fact that Washington plays a lot of zone. He was kind of playing center field, picking off passes, but I think he has great defensive intangibles, and I think it is going to translate to an on-ball defender at the NBA level. Number 12 is a guy I really like, is Carson Edwards. I know he doesn't get as much pub out there as a lot of people, but a question I'll pose to you in a minute, Dizzle, is it's being discussed now out there is what's the biggest difference or how much difference is there really between a guy like Darius Garland, who's universally praised in the scouting community, and a guy like Carson Edwards. So what do you really see? Is there that much difference in their games and how they diverge?
I love Edwards as a college player, and I have him ranked lower on my big board, but I think he'll have a niche when he gets into NBA and will be a guy who has a career for several years to come. I think the difference there is Garland's potential to do it at the NBA level as opposed to just the college. Garland's more explosive as an athlete, now albeit not as strong, but I think that's the change of pace that his speed allows him and the impact it'll have at the NBA level, and I think would have had at the college level this year had he had the health to stay there all year at Vandy. So, but Edwards can score it. There's no doubt about that. He's an older guy, so I think we're seeing much more of a finished product than we are in Garland. But he's going to score it. I think it'll be second unit guy, but there's value in that, and I think he'll have a long career in the league for sure.
And again, those are great points, and I appreciate you making them. I am higher on Edwards than most people in the community, so it's not entirely surprising that he's number 12 on my list, and it surprises a few different people out there. Number 13 on my list is Mfiondu Kabengele, the center out of Florida State. I really like his game as far as how I believe he's going to translate again to the modern NBA. This is a guy who can play defense, can be a rim protector, a high-level shot blocker, but also has a nice touch from the outside. Now, he's far from an unfinished product, but again, you're getting to the point in the draft where all these guys are far from finished products. So I really like the upside, kind of upside swing for Kevin Gelly. I don't think he will actually go this high in the draft, per se. This is where I value him as a prospect. Really like him, one of my favorite players in the 2019 NBA draft. Number 14 is a guy, I just think he's solid. And to be frank, he's one of the kind of guys I normally am not as high on because I think he's more of a high floor, low ceiling type of player as P.J. Washington out of Kentucky. Just one of those guys that the more you watch, the more you like, I think. He seemed to really take on a leadership role in Kentucky. I know he was not eligible to play a number of different games. He got injured. So there are some question marks as a concern to his overall prognosis heading into the draft. But 6'8", 225, 7'2" wingspan. Again, you talk about he's a veteran. He's only 20 years of age. I feel like he's been around the block longer than what he has been coming into the draft as a junior. But again, I think he's solid. Does he have that 3-point range? No, he probably doesn't. But I believe he stretched the floor long enough to the long 2-point range. He's the kind of player that I think we'll look back in this draft 5 years from now and say, why didn't P.J. Washington go higher? Because we really liked him in college. Maybe didn't work out as well. But he should have gone higher, and we just didn't think that way. So I feel like the community and the scouting community, we may be missing the boat on P.J. Washington. And number 15, another guy I think we might be missing the boat on. Intangibles like crazy. Grant Williams, again, fits a similar bill to P.J. Washington. The more I watched on film, the more I liked him. 6'7", 240, a 6'10 wingspan. Really nothing physical on him that's special. I think he's a very well-rounded game and continue to improve throughout his college career from where he was as a freshman to his junior year. Just kept getting better and better. Developed to be a pretty nice shooter, excellent passer. I think he's the kind of guy, again, you're looking for guys who are to find a role in the NBA. This is the kind of guy that's going to improve your locker room, going to be a great team player, going to be able to move the ball around on offense, rotates on defense, going to be able to help on defense end. So I like Grant Williams. Again, more than most. I will admit my 11 to 15 a little bit off the mark. But are any of these guys on my list, would you say that I'm advocating for too much?
No, all you guys, we have a very different list as we mentioned we would at this point, and I think it'll even get more pronounced as we move on. All the guys you listed I like, and at this point in the draft, there's a point in every draft, and it seems to be higher or earlier in this draft than most, where you have to decide as a GM, are you drafting on what you've seen, veteran players that can produce, and you've seen it, or potential. And it goes, I think, in part to your strategy overall. A lot of the teams that decide one way, that stick with potential, they go with that year after year. They know what they're getting. They're thinking more short-term and maybe a lower ceiling, like we discussed, than we are a project player that we can bring in. And I think part of that is determined by what you have at that position. Do you need him to play right away? And if so, you need to find a more polished guy if you expect to contend. Starting my 16 through 20, a guy I have much higher at this time last year, looking forward to this year's draft, Rui Hachimura, Gonzaga. Touched on him a little bit. We talked about Brandon Clark. Somewhat similar builds. Hachimura is a little bit longer, a little bit heavier than he is. Really good size and physical tools. Shot the three at 42%, but less than one attempt a game. So he's really just kind of exploring out there this year after not doing anything at all there the year prior. Physically gifted, not a good passer or decision maker. The ball seems to stop at least a beat every time he touches it on offense, and that's where he and Clark differ. At least one of the reasons they differ the most to me is you can plug Clark into an offense now, and he'll thrive in it. He'll make it run like clockwork. He'll be reliable, dependable, and on time. Hachimura isn't there yet as far as seeing the game at that speed. A lot of his buckets at the college level were scored on strength and size around the rim. But for a guy that's going to be playing where I think teams are going to play him, I don't know how that will translate. 7 to 16, number 17 is the guy you just touched on really well, P.J. Washington from Kentucky. To me, he can just play. He came in as a highly touted guy, staying that second year or the additional year at Kentucky served him really well. Not the best athlete or finisher at the rim, but as Matt said, he can just play. And I think he's somebody that can contribute. Maybe not as a starter, but in a rotation for a decent team right away. Number 18, I have Nickeil Alexander-Walker, the combo guard out of Virginia Tech. I'm not the most athletic guy. but has the size to account for that. Really good in the pick and roll because of his ability to pass and see the floor. Shot almost 40% both years he was at Virginia Tech in several attempts, almost 5 attempts a game there. I think he's a really polished player that you're going to, or as polished as you will get at this point in this draft. I think a lot of teams would covet him right away as a secondary playmaker to begin with, and maybe to slide into more than that as he grows. Number 19, Lugans Dort, wing out of Arizona State. Talk about NFL comps in the draft process. This guy is outside linebacker as far as his build and aggressiveness. He plays with a fury. And watching him play for Bobby Hurley this year was kind of fun to watch because I don't know which one was more animated and more aggressive, the coach or his guard. Uses his strength and explosiveness to score, but makes some terrible decisions with shot selection. Doesn't pass that well, rebounds like a beast at the wing position. So you're going to have a team that likes him. I think a team that wants to have a guy that can come in and score off the bench and maybe not carry that much of a load elsewhere while he learns the game and gets to play with a little bit better pace and decision-making on offense. I think he's a good guy for that. And this guy at 20, I had no idea where to put. I'll be honest with you. The potential and what you would think a great player in today's NBA game would look like is there. Now, there's injury and, honestly, character and work ethic questions with him, but that's bold. Manute's boy out of University of Oregon, 7'3", 7'7" wingspan, can shoot it. Barely played a couple games, 9 games this year before he injured his foot. We all know the track record with foot injuries for bigs isn't good. There's some question marks on him anyway, some red flags coming in. But you see him play, and I don't know where to fit him in today's game, but it doesn't really matter if he can't be available to play on game day. So he rounds out my 20th spot. Again, it's Hachimura at 16, P.J. Washington, Alexander Walker at 18, Dort at 19 from Arizona State, and the big fella, Bo at number 20 from Oregon.
Well, now we got some things to talk about again here, man. So Coby White and Bo, it's funny is that as you're talking about him in some regard, you said, well, I'm a little higher on White than I thought I would be, and you get the ball, and you say, man, I really don't know what to put this guy. Well, I'm going to dive into my 16 through 20 rank, and again, you'll notice Coby White's name still will not be called. He's still further down my list, and you're going to have to wait a long time to hear the name of Bo. Spoiler alert, I do not have a first-round grade on Bo. I don't really see the appeal, to be quite frank, on him. I just don't know how his game translates to NBA level. I hear people say, well, he could be a unicorn type of player, like a Porzingis, where he can shoot and play defense. Well, to me, I just don't know he's ever going to hold up to the NBA level. He's just barely over 200 pounds at 7'5", 7'6". I mean, incredibly lanky. I think he's going to be a problem on defense as far as getting fouls. I just don't see him as anything more than a 15, maybe 20-minute player at best. And I feel as a role player. So Bo, not a big fan on mine, but I will get to some guys I am big fans of. And again, our list is very different now. 16 through 20 for me. 16 is Dylan Windler, the small forward out of Belmont, a guy I really like. Can straight up shoot it. Very crafty, and I think a guy that doesn't get as much love for his athleticism. Can really get to the hoop. A little bit of an issue on defense. I'm not sure how he's going to match up at the NBA level, but again, at this point in the draft, there's nothing wrong with finding a guy who has a couple of skills that translate and developing more into a specialist. Say he plays around a LeBron or a Giannis, where they're looking for guys just to stand on the outside and shoot and space the floor. Dylan Windler could find a role in offense such as that. Number 17, you talk about guys who are some of my favorite players in the draft. Ty Jerome is a guy I really like, a gritty guy. It looks like the kind of guy he's going to step onto the NBA floor immediately, and you know what you're getting. He's a veteran player, amazing footwork. It's one thing you notice right away is a guy who's very composed, plays big in the big moments, and really gets the most out of his athletic ability. People will point to the fact that, hey, he's 6'5" with a 6'4" wingspan. I get that. You could point to the same thing with Tyler Hero, a guy I'll get to in a little while. I know you're higher on Hero than I am. Guy 6'6", has a 6'3" wingspan. Again, we know what these guys are, and I think there's a comfortability factor in knowing what these guys are. Are they ever going to be all NBA defenders? No, they're not going to be. These are the kind of guys that you can run NBA offensive sets for. They can come off a pick, just a full as a shooter, and they have enough ability to get to the rim. And they're above average passers, especially in Jerome's case. I really like Jerome. Again, a guy I'm higher on than most people in the community. I have number 17. Number 18, Cameron Johnson, another player. You know what you're getting. Very polished, 6'8", 210, 6'10" wingspan. He's going to be 23 years of age and heading into the NBA draft. So again, you talk about a high floor, low ceiling prospect. Again, this is basically a guy you're hoping that can switch on defense, can be a spot up shooter on offense, and you know what you're getting. Your guy, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, I have him in a similar value as you have number 19. Again, I think it's a guy that could project to be a guy who can switch on defense at the NBA level. 6'6", 200 pounds, 6'9" wingspan. Offensively, I view him as a secondary ball handler. I don't think he'll ever be your primary initiator, but I think a guy that can help on offense and also will translate well on defense. And number 20, again, a guy you're higher on than I am, Gogo Batadze, the prospect, the international prospect from Georgia, 6'11", 250 pounds, built very solid, 7'1" wingspan. Again, I like him. I like the fact that you like him more than I did. To be quite frank, I was a little higher on him earlier in the process. Just 19 years of age, scratching the surface. I do think he could be interchangeable on defense with a little bit more limited versatility than he has on the offensive end. I think he can stretch the floor as a shooter. Just needs more development. But again, at number 20, I'm okay with him. I believe you had him around 10 or 11, somewhere in that range. So we're in the same ballpark. I would like to move through 21 through 30 here. Going to turn the range over you. Be a little bit more rapid here as we go through. So we're going to double up here. So number 21 through 30 on your big board. What do you got?
Number 21, I have Kevin Porter Jr. from USC. Not sure what to make of him. Shot it great from three and terribly from the line. Inconsistent effort. Doesn't always look the part of a pro as far as the way he handles himself and how he plays. He's a number 21. Number 22, your guy out of Washington, Matisse Thybulle. Outstanding wing defender with a great build if that's what you're looking for. He can guard multiple positions. Shot pretty well over 4 years. I'm not sure how much more he can get to offensively as far as his skill set. Number 23, Grant Williams from Tennessee. A winner, good screener, high IQ guy, really good help defender, dependable more than anything else. Didn't shoot much from three. I think he can develop that enough to be a solid player on a good team. But the question is where to draft that guy, as we discussed. Number 24, your guy, Dylan Windler out of Belmont. I had the misfortune of watching him light my Terps up in this year's tournament, and we switched guy after guy onto him, couldn't do anything with him. Was a spot-up shooter his first 2 years. The last 2 years was the guy. Shot 41%, over 4 years combined, even though everybody in the gym knew he was getting it the last 2 years. Number 25, Keldon Johnson out of Kentucky. Came in with a rep as a good shooter and didn't disappoint. Was a tougher player than I thought he would be for a freshman that's billed as a shooter. Maybe that was my mistake to critique him as that before I saw him. More strong than he is quick, but a tough guy that I think will shoot it well in the NBA. Number 26, Ifeanyi Kabengele, big fella out of Florida State. Another guy that kind of rose in this process for me. Shoots it really well, skilled offensively. Now, he's almost 22 years old, but at the same time, he still lacks experience, which is, I'm not sure which category to slot him in as far as how high his ceiling can be. But I like him enough at this point in the draft in the mid-20s. 27, Nicholas Claxton, the big guy out of the University of Georgia. Size and athleticism profiles well as a modern NBA big. Brings it up himself, was given a green light by Tom Crean on defensive boards. Shows some ball handling ability. Still a project, but has potential. 28, another guy I struggled with where to put, Darius Baisley, the wing, out of whatever high school the young man went to. Because the past year, he's been scarce as far as playing competitive basketball. Great length, fluid athlete. I really question his shot mechanics, but shows the ability to guard a lot of positions, maybe 1 through 4 once he fills out. Number 29, Jalen McDaniels, the big wing combo guy, depending on what you're looking for, out of San Diego State University. Size of a big, but can handle, possess it a little bit, shoot it like a wing, but sometimes he resorts back to wing tendencies, which for a guy that's 6'10", with a 7-foot wingspan, you don't always want. And number 30, maybe the more unusual guy in this year's draft as far as size, weight, speed, combination, and skill set that goes with it is Talon Horton Tucker from Iowa State. 6'4", not what you would call svelte in the build or athletic or quick, but he has 7'1" wingspan, a tough player on both ends. I've seen comps that he's a smaller Draymond Green, which we can temper that for a while so we see him do it at the next level. But his length gives him a chance, and his craftiness gives him a chance to cover up for what he lacks in quickness and in height. An unusual offensive player, but I think a team at the end of round one, I think if a San Antonio or a Golden State gets him, you might not have valued him that high, but it's like a oh shit kind of thing. Like they're going to use him well, and he's going to be a productive player. 21 through 30 for you, Matt. What's that look like?
Well, if you would, just for the podcast listeners, if you would, give me your 21 to 30. Just a recap, just their names real quickly, if you would, please.
Absolutely. 21, Kevin Porter Jr., USC. 22, Matisse Thybulle from Washington. Grant Williams from Tennessee at 23. Dylan Windler from Belmont at 24. Keldon Johnson out of Kentucky following him. Then at 26, Kevin Gelly, big man out of Florida State. And the last four of my 21 to 30s are Nicholas Claxton out of Georgia, Darius Basley out of his high school, and Jalen McDaniels, San Diego State University, with Talon Horton Tucker out of ISU rounding it up.
And the reason why I wanted to cut off of 30 personally is that's basically, the cut off of the first round, give you an idea of what guys we value in the first round territory. And I appreciate the recap because I'm getting old and I may have forgotten them. So briefly, the guys I have in the same territory, 21 through 30. I have Jackson Hayes, the center from Texas. Again, you're a little bit higher on him than I am. I just question whether he'll ever find that specific role in the NBA. I just don't know if I value his game as much as everybody else. But again, he's just an 18-year-old big man, 6'11", 7'3" wingspan. So there's a lot to work with when it comes to Jackson Hayes. One player I'm lower on than virtually everybody in the community, and that's Coby White. I have him at 22. Again, similar to what you're saying, I think he's more of a combo guard. So I just don't know if I can project him to be a lead guard at the NBA. I just have my questions when it comes to that kind of player, and so he drops down my list. I still have a first-round value on him, just more outside the lottery, and by all accounts, his name is likely to be called in the top 10 picks from what I understand. 23, Romeo Langford, again, a bit of an enigma, highly ranked prospect out of Indiana, 6'6", 6'11" wingspan. Just did not stroke it and play as efficient as we expected coming into his career as a Hoosier. 24, Tyler Hero, guy you're a little higher on than me. Again, I know what he is. I think he is the kind of guy you can play off of your pick and roll as a spot-up shooter, can come off a pick and can help your offense basically as your shooter in your offense. 25, a guy I'm a little surprised you don't have in your list, to be quite frank, is Bruno Fernando, a guy from your Terps, 6'10", 7'3" wingspan, 20-year-old sophomore center. I think he has some offensive skills. I question defense a little bit. I'm a little different evaluation on Fernando. A player I'm not exactly sure what I'm getting, but I do like some of the traits. 26 to 30 now. KZ Akpala, the wing sophomore out of Stanford. I've seen some random Ingram comps out there. Now, it's a little too rich for my blood. I can't really get behind that. And what cracks me up about that is I see their pro comp for KZ is Brandon Ingram, and then they have him ranked 25th on their big board. I think, well, if he's Brandon Ingram, he can't be 25 on your big board in a draft like this. So I don't really get that comparison. He's long and lanky, I guess. But there are some skills to work with KZ, all jokes aside. Again, 6'9", 7'2" wingspan. I think he could project to affect the game on both ends of the court. I like him as a first rounder. Rui Hachimura, the power forward out of Gonzaga. Again, you're a little more higher on him than me. I think he basically a polar opposite of Brandon Clark, where I think Brandon Clark's game on defense he could be a all-pro defender. I really like Clark on defense. Hachimura, he gets his chops on the offense end. I think he could be a scoring threat in the post. Continue to refine his offensive game, but I think he's a little bit lacking on the defensive end. Number 28, You mentioned him as well, the big man out of Georgia, Nick Claxton, a late riser here in the NBA draft process, the NBA draft scouting combine. He did a great job out there getting his name out there, and you watch more film on him. Very good around the rim, good defender. I think he, again, a bit raw, but again, you get here at the tail end of round one, you get him on a really good team, like you mentioned, a Spurs or a Warriors, and you develop that kind of guy. You don't need him to have any kind of impact early on in his playing career. 29, Keldon Johnson. You mentioned him again, 6'6", 210 wing out of Kentucky, 6'9" wingspan. Again, a guy I'm warming up to. The more I watch him, the more I like him. I think he can affect the game in a myriad of ways. But again, I think his ceiling is a bit restrictive. And number 30 on my list is a foreign player, 6'11", power forward out of Patrol, Lucas Samanic. He's my comp to him was a little bit like Dario Saric when he came overseas as a Sixer. I don't think he's going to be anything on defense. I think he's going to struggle on the defensive end. Don't think he's going to be able to compete against bigger, stronger, faster athletes in the NBA. But there are some skills to like on the offensive end. So if you're, again, looking for a little bit of firepower, again, a guy off your bench who can stroke it, can score, can bring a little energy to your offense. To me, at this point in the draft, Luka is that kind of player. So a few players that I do not have in my top 30 that you mentioned earlier. Kevin Porter Jr., I have him with 31, just outside. I'm not as high on Kevin Porter Jr., neither are you. A lot of people in the community have him in their top 10 to 15. He is a polarizing prospect for sure. You mentioned Taylor Horton Tucker, rather. I think you'll like this. My comparison to him was an old school Clarence Weatherspoon. That's why I see a lot of Spoon Man and Taylor Horton Tucker when I watch him. Maybe it's just his chubby build. I don't know what it is, but again, not exactly sure what to do with Horton Tucker, one of the younger prospects in this draft, 6'4", a 7'1" wingspan, just an odd, unique prospect. Taylor Horton Tucker. I have Lou Dort at 35 on my list. Again, not really sure what to do with him. It's built, like you said, like a linebacker. I don't think he'll have any issue dealing with the NBA physicality. I just don't know if he can catch up on offense as he can on defense. Bol, I have number 40 on my list. A couple guys I mentioned that I liked at this point. Eric Pascal, the senior power forward for Villanova. I think you know what you're getting. He's a role player, but again, great chemistry guy. Continuing to develop at Villanova to no surprise. That coach staff knows what they're doing with players. I really like Chuma Okeke, the power forward out of Auburn. A shame he got injured in the tournament. I think that his value now is the early to mid second round given his injury. But I think you could get a first round type of talent early to mid round too. So I really like Okeke. You could take Porter out of Missouri. He's a player in that same vein. Injury history has really caught up to him. But again, a first-round talent, if you can get him in round two, that's how you can really walk away from the draft as what they call a considered draft winner. So those are the kind of guys I'm higher on than some people that I like in round two. That could be round one values and could very well find themselves selected in the first round. Justin, not every player that you like, receive a first round grade. So what are a few guys that just missed the cut for you that you really like, but you value more in the early to mid round two range?
Sure. A few of those were guys that you covered earlier and that you were higher on than I am, obviously. First is Carson Edwards, the scoring point guard out of Purdue. And a few of these guys, I wouldn't be shocked if they went in the first round. They're just out of, like he said, outside of the top 30 in my rankings. Bruno Fernando, one of my Terps, really struggled, physical specimen. He should guard better than he does, and his awareness on offense, too many times this past year I saw teams go to double him, and he froze and the shot clock expires. Just awareness needs to improve, and if he's an offensive guy that needs to work on defense, he needs to be a little bit better at that right now than he is to me to get time at the NBA level. Ty Jerome, a guy I really like. Loved him as a college player. I think he's going to stick in the league. Now, whether you slide him in the teens or in the 30s, that's to each their own as far as what you expect and what you want on your team. A guy, if he does go second round, he's going to be a steal for somebody. Cameron Johnson for North Carolina, one of the best shooters this year at the college level. He is a little advanced in age, so he might be near to where he's going to be as a full development goes, but can knock down shots from everywhere and has a body that, at least in theory, could thrive in the switching and flexible defensive schemes in the NBA. And last guy, Chuma Okeke, Matt also touched on him, but had him outside of his top 30. Now, the torn ACL in the tournament, late in the tournament, going to sideline him for some time, but the potential he had as a shooter, as an athlete, and just an all-around good player. And you saw what Auburn missed when he went out. So a guy outside of my top 30 was also outside of Matt's. Some guy that will bring value, maybe not the first year, next year after the draft because of his injury, but sooner than later in my mind.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully you've enjoyed our Big Board podcast. I really enjoyed it. I like breaking down the players and seeing the differences between my board and Justin's. Hopefully you've had a good time with this podcast. Now, on our next podcast, we really get into one of the more entertaining podcasts that we do. We're going to go pick through pick 1 to 30 in the NBA draft, and we're going to try to predict. Not what we would do, not if we were GMs, but what we think is actually going to happen on Thursday night during the draft. We're going to put ourselves on the clock and take turns and say what we expect to happen during the draft. That should be a lot of fun. So hopefully you enjoyed the podcast. As always, again, we are the Next Big Thing in Sports podcast. You can find us anywhere that has the podcast platform. It is Apple, iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and we are also now on YouTube, so you can find us anywhere. And when you arrive to said platform, if you would leave us a 5-star review, it goes a long way to helping us out. And as always, you can find us on our partnering website, thenextbigthinginsports.com. So we're going to sign off from here. We want to thank you guys for listening, and we're going to check you out next time on our 2019 NBA Draft Mock Draft Podcast.